Hi, this is Rachel Rehart, and I am going to talk to you today about using levels and curves. And in a way, they're both kind of similar to each other. They have similar functions. They're very powerful tools. So this is going to be a bit of an interesting thing to try to give you so much information and not have you just feel like, oh my goodness, I've just drunk from the fire hose. So if you feel like you need to watch this a few times, that's fantastic. Don't even worry. Okay, so I'm going to start with levels because levels is a little bit simpler. You only have 3 points you're really working with. When you get into curves, you can add many more points, and I'll show you. There are tricks that you can use on each of these, and I'll kind of work them up from the bottom up to the top. We're going to edit this photo using levels and then using curves and talking our way through how we can do this. Okay, this is levels. And as you see, look, here's your histogram telling me the story of the tones in the image. There's not a lot of straight blacks. As you can see, there's only maybe just a pinch, and that's not even all the way black because it was kind of backlit. It was a little bit hazy, and so this isn't really even a true black. So as you can see, there's not necessarily a true black here. If there was a really strong black, it might start jetting up against here, telling me that I've hit the limit of blacks and they're starting to smush together. It comes through here. There's a lot of good shadow detail. There's our midtones here. Here's sort of those brights that you've got. Skin tones tend to fall generally in this area. Brights, there's good skin tones. We come down, here's some highlights. And as you can see, we start to have some highlights butting up against there because we've got these areas that are a bit bright on the tips of the grass. And in her hair a little bit here, we've got some brightness. So this tells us the story of the image. And there's the story of the image played out in the levels window, so I can kind of see what this is. Now let me talk to you about what most of these things are. So right now we're working in the RGB version of levels, which means it affects the brightness of the tones. It affects simply the density of the image, the tones itself. It won't change the color, but we can get in, and we will get in and kind of talking about adding some reds, some blues, some greens. Well, we're balancing those tones. We'll talk about that too, because that is a whole nother interesting thing, talking about balancing. What are we balancing with? We'll explain that in a minute. And then this kind of gives you your output. We're not going to mess around a lot with this, but we can kind of show you how you can make a gentle type of matte. It's harder to make a matte in levels than it is in curves, but we'll show you how to color pop, how to lift some tones, and it's kind of an exciting thing. Okay, I don't often move my highlights. As you can see, it'll start making those whites like really hot, really fast. Do you see how it's mushing my highlights together? It's saying anything past this area acts as though it's 255. So you have 0 to 255. Those are the colors that your camera can render. 0 means it's completely black. That's as black as it can possibly be. No other colors involved there. And white is as white as it can possibly be. It's blown out. There's no detail left because it's completely white. If I pull this down, it makes things that are at lower levels, 233, begins to act as though it is blown out. So I don't often do this unless it feels like the image is very drab. You can pull these together, and as you see, the closer these come, do you see how it's kind of given some pop? Look at that. That right there has popped my image considerably. I just need to be careful that I don't blow out highlights. So I don't often mess a lot with the whites, but it can give you some interesting pop. So I'm just letting you know that's about all that I do with the whites there. Is if I want to add a little pop and I don't have too much that can go crazy, because it gets crazy pretty quick. So what happened here when I played with my blacks, it kind of pushed things up. Do you see how it also, as I move this up, it's kind of added some, oh, sorry, let me turn that back on. There we go. I was like, where did it go? There we go. I get talking and I get so excited. But you see how it's turned this a lot more close to that true black. I mean, I'm going to have to pull it way over there for it to turn all the way true black. And that's a bit much for me. But here, do you see how we've added some significant pop to this image by adding blacks? That's a really interesting and important thing. Remember that adding blacks can add some of that depth to your image. Also, you know, if you feel like it's getting a little too crazy, you can always come here and that will kind of lift those blacks. So as you notice, like I've done a little bit of a matte type of situation here. You can turn this up to sort of add that matting effect and then bring the contrast needed back here. So, do you see how you've matted up this area? That's a simple way to add matte to an image. I'm not looking to do that at this moment, but blacks are an interesting way to add pop or matte to an image. So pop is just working with this black slider, and adding matte is messing with your output levels a bit. You could even, maybe let's pull this up if we were going to add that matte. So we pulled it up, we've added a little bit matte there, and we can bring down the highlights as well. And right there, you've got a pretty effective little matte type of thing going on. You can definitely get more out of curves, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there we are, we've added a little bit of pop. Now this mid-tone slider, this is the one you're going to use most often because really this controls a lot of the middle of the image. If I pull it back, things get darker. I don't really want to do that per se. Like here, I can lift up some of those skin tones. I don't go too crazy with it because it kind of washes it out if you do. But a little bit of pop, as you see, look, we've lifted some of the tones of their faces, brought them out of shadow a little bit. This can be a nice thing if you maybe want to just brighten faces. Let's make another layer. Let's come over here and add another levels layer. Oops, I'm sorry, I just added curves. Okay, there we go. Add that second levels layer. And this one, let's just say we're going to pop it up a little bit on the brighter end. Maybe add a little pinch of pop. Now let's click on that mask and invert it, Command I, because we don't want to make everything in the background look so crazy. But look, we can just quickly paint this on. In fact, let me make this a little bit brighter. Okay, there we go. So we can just quickly make sure my mask is active, paint this on, bring up the brightness on their faces a little bit. And as you can see, look, I just brought a little brightness in. So that's a really quick, easy way if maybe it's a little bit too dark in an area. Here I've lifted overall, I've added some of this pop. There you go. So I mean, just these two levels, we've done that. Maybe I'll even just, as I'm doing the pop on this one, maybe I'll just pull it in a bit to add a little bit more of that type of pop as we've talked about it. Okay, now this image, now that I've lifted it a little bit, it's not quite as blue. So let's bring it back. I think we could show a little bit of how we can warm an image, because you see they're a little bit in the coolness because they're in the shadow. And I feel like this road gets very cool back here and it gets quite cool here. So we could add some warmth to this image, I think, to really make these colors pop some more, to make the whites look more truly white, and things like that. So let's add a little bit of warmth. And you're going, okay, you're going to do this with levels? Oh, you bet. I am going to totally do this with levels. So when we're thinking warm, the colors that we're going to go with are reds and yellows, don't you think? Yes, that absolutely is how I warm things up. So I need to explain how we balance colors to bring about a warming effect. So we have these tones here, RGB, red, green, blue. We've heard this, right? Red, green, blue, RGB. We talked about RGB before. So the flip side of that is CMY. We've heard of that also, CMYK. It's a type of color method. So let me show you how this works. I'm not going to use this all the time because I want you to see this though. I'm going to get rid of what I do here. But look, if I pull up, it becomes red, R. But if I pull down, C, cyan. It's that greenish blue color. All right. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm using curves, blah. Let me see, let me just get rid of this. I get so excited when I start teaching RGB to always teach that in curves. And I will show it again in curves, but as you see, I can make the choice again here as well. So R, as you see, I have the choice to say, look, I'm adding more, and it's going red, R. But the flip side is C, like as in CMYK, cyan. Okay, let's bring that back to 0 again, because we don't want to have it be crazy like that. Green, okay, so as we add more, it becomes green. As we take it out, it becomes more magenta in tone. Okay, again, let's take that back to 1. That's the default. And blue, what do you think is going to happen if I push it this way? It will become bluish. And I want you to notice blue is more of a kind of purpley blue in Photoshop. That's important to note because sometimes the blue and the cyan become confusing, and yellow is the other direction. Okay, so balancing, RGB, CMY. So I want to add a little bit of warmth. What am I going to do? I'm going to come in to the reds, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to add a pinch of red here. And then I want to come in over here and say, I want to take out a pinch of blue. Okay, now that I think is maybe a little bit too much. So I can come over here and I can tone it down a little bit, but look, it brings some warmth and life to this area. Now, if I was using curves, I would have a lot easier time targeting these specific tones. It's a little bit harder to do this in levels. Levels is a little bit more limited. So this is kind of what we've done. I'm going to actually take a snapshot here so we can come back and look at this. This level is going to be warming. And imagine if something you have is too warm, you could go the opposite direction. You could take out some red and put in some cyan. You could take out some yellow and put in some blue. So as you kind of move those things around, sometimes you get in, and you're shooting in the trees and it's really green and people get lots of green on their face shooting through that green light. You can add just a pinch of magenta to counterbalance that over green tone. So this is nice. Remember, balancing. That's the key to getting good color. Okay, now this level was a pop and brighten, and this was faces. Okay, so we've done those. Now what I want to do is I'm going to come over to my history. I'm going to take a snapshot, as you see. Now I can come back to this snapshot. I'm going to name this snapshot levels so that we can remember. Okay, so we've got levels. That's great. All right, I'm going to come over here. Now I'm going to get rid of these because I want to be able to walk through a quick edit using curves now. So you've got the basics of how we use levels, and I do use them, although I will tell you I use curves incredibly more because look at this. I can set point after point after point after point on this. And I mean, that might be a little bit too much because I'm going a little crazy trying to show you, but look, I mean, just adding those points there, we've added a lot of pop and interest to this image. There you go. As you can see, I mean, that's just one curve. Do you see I've added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different points. I can still pull these in. I can still pull those blacks. Did you see how I pulled those in? Same way, I've kind of popped those blacks. Do you see how I can pop those right up by sliding this? I'm popping those blacks. Or I can bring in those whites, just like I did. But here I have infinite control over these other areas. I can pull them up. As you can see, look, I've pulled up the shadows and it's kind of matted it. I pulled it over and it's popped it. Here, I'm darkening those shadow areas. The blacks I've popped and lifted. I'm darkening the shadow areas. I'm lifting those lower mid-tones. I'm pulling down the bright so they're not overly bright. I've pulled down a little bit of the highlight so we don't lose too much of the grass. We don't want the grass to go crazy. And as you can see, look, that has really given me a lot of control over this image. I'm excited about that. So just in one curve, I've done so much to the image. Again, let's talk about what we've got going on here. This is your whites, the white highlights. This is your brights, your midtones, brights. This area again is often your skin tones. This area is your midtones. This area is your shadows, and this is the blacks, the very darkest area. So think of it as lifting the blacks or pulling in more shadow for more interest. Lifting, because sometimes those mid shadows can get real kind of crunchy and yucky. You can lift those up a little bit, but you can really do anything you want, anything that your image needs. If you look at it and think, oh, you know, I've blown out some of these things, you can pull them back. You can pull them back in. So you can pull these together. If, as you can see, my histogram, I've captured the tones so that they kind of fill the histogram. If you have a smaller histogram, you could pull these into the edges so that you can get more pop, because sometimes your image can seem dull if your histogram doesn't hit the edges. So you can pull the histogram, pull these points closer to give you more pop. Okay, now I can also do the same thing that I did. Okay, I'm going to say I'm going to add another curves layer. I can come in, I can add a little bit of warming, and I want to show you this fantastic thing. You see this? It looks like a finger with an arrow. It's called the targeted adjustment tool. So if I say, you know what, look, I think over here, his shirt is a little bit kind of that blue cyan. So look, I want to add a little bit of red to lift that up a bit. And I want to add some yellow, which would be pull it down, right? Remember how we talked about blue and yellow? Okay, pull it down. Okay, so overall, I don't really know that I want the image this yellow. It's gone a little bit overly yellow, so I'm going to turn it down a little bit. But you see how his skin has kind of, or his shirt has gotten a little less blue. Their skin's a little bit warmer, not quite so blue. We've got this road looking pretty good, kind of interesting there. And I could always come back in and paint their face, but do you notice I didn't have to, because I could target the areas that were their face. In this one, do you see how I lifted it up? So I could target specifically those skin tones by lifting that area up. So it gives me a lot of control to have so many points that I can pull. So if you're thinking, those highlights aren't quite right, those kind of bright areas, not quite right. Highlights, I need to pull them down. This is how you give yourself that look. Now let's give it a little bit more. I gave it a little bit of a matte. Let me just show you a little bit more how you can add a matte. Usually you need to make sure that you have some good shadows because you're going to lift it. Okay, now that's like a crazy matte, but do you see how we've done this? You can always turn it down, but that gives you that kind of matted type of look. That's a very basic one. You could, give yourself a little bit of contrast there, but making sure that you lift up those blacks after you've given yourself some contrast is the key to a decent looking matte. And there's a lot of ways to accomplish this. Some people like to make sure that they pull down their highlights even more. There's different ways to do it. It just kind of depends on your style. Okay, and then let me get rid of all of this. I'll just turn it off right there and right there. Okay, we've turned it off. Let me show you one more trick. This is called the S curve. You'll hear about this often. People say, oh yeah, do you have an S curve? Now you want to be gentle with the S curve. Like if you make a whole, like make it look like a big S, it's gonna look kind of crazy. But a gentle S curve, especially if you've already shot an image that has some decent pop, just a little lift. See how it's crossing this area? It's really given it some quick pop. Give you some interesting pop. In fact, so much pop on this one that I might even turn it down a little bit. But you can quickly get some interesting pop, and you can bring in the blacks, you can pull down these whites, you can pull them over, any of these type of things, and you're adding that pop. But that S curve can really add some interesting pop to an image. Now, if you inverted that S curve, you say, I'm going to lower my brights and I'm going to lift my shadows. I mean, that's the opposite. Do you see how we've taken away that contrast because we've made it even further apart here? Here we're bringing them kind of closer together, these points, and that gives it a little more pop. The closer these points are pulled. There we go. So these are closer together versus when I pulled them apart. That made it have a little bit less pop. It became a kind of a little bit more dull. But sometimes you can have overly contrasted image. You shoot in, lighting that gives you a little bit of that high contrast. This is a nice way you could do that to kind of undo that overly contrasty thing. Pull back some of those brights that have gotten a little too bright. Lift those shadows that have gotten a little bit deeper. But you have, as you can see, so much control pulling on this curve. Generally, with today's really nice lenses and cameras, I find that often I have a decent image to start with. I'm not starting with a raw hunk of nothing because the image has good sharpness, it has good clarity, it has things like that. So I want to be careful as I'm working within the curve. Pulling it to extremes can give you where you just really block up those colors and make things look not very nice. So in using curves, I find that a lot of times less is more. Adding upon it with multiple curves can give you that control that you need over the tonality of your image. I will go further into skin correcting and tones in another module called color correcting. We'll be using the CMYK method. We'll be using curves quite a lot. But here we wanted you to kind of understand the nuts and bolts and feel free to start utilizing curves. Let's turn this off. I mean, curves can be as basic as saying, you know, I feel like I need to lift this image a bit. I just want it lifted. Or curves can be as simple as saying, I like maybe where this image is at and I just want to give it a little pop. I just want to do, you know, a little of that. Maybe that's what I like. It can be as simple as these type of things, or it can be as crazy as the first few curves that we did, you know, when we came in and said, okay, let me pull this one in. Let me turn off these others. But do you see how, I mean, it's starting to get a little crazy up in here. We're doing these more complicated convolutions. And as you get maybe more comfortable, you'll say, oh, this is kind of what I want to do in my curve. But you can always build up to it and think about each one as you're doing it. I need a little pop. I need a little lift. I need my brights to be pulled up because I'm worried about skin tones. So working along this curve gives you a lot of things to think about. The contrast, add that pop. Do these different things. Work in the colors because again, you're balancing red with cyan, green with magenta, blue with yellow. And actually, you know, as I think about it, this one might even have a little bit too much. Let's try this because I'm sort of thinking this might even have a little bit too much green. What if we let's come in here and say, you know, it feels like maybe over here there just is a pinch. Yeah, look, pulling out that green. Do you see how like I feel like we're gonna maybe take out a little bit of blue, give them a pinch more yellow, and then just a titch of the red. And I feel like we can really see it, especially in Dad's face, and a little bit of that. Like, so I mean, as you can see, like I think maybe that's a little bit more natural skin tone. I think that the whites, you know, while still looking shadowed, are a little bit cleaner than they were, not so blue. So I mean, you can just quickly come in and fix up those colors really quick. Did you see I just really quickly kind of came in, gave them a little bit more lively skin tone? And then, you know, like we said, we could come in and maybe, was it this one? You know, it's got just a little brightening. Maybe it needs a little brightening. Or maybe we have our initial one here. Maybe it needs that little pop. Things like that. Do you see how we've got these different things that we can add? Curves is one of your most powerful parts of Photoshop. So I want you to feel really, really comfortable. Get in and explore it and see what you've got going. It's extremely powerful. Using it for colors, using it for tone, using it for brightening, darkening, contrast. As I showed you, a pinch of matte. This is an extremely powerful tool in Photoshop. Thank you so much. We are looking forward to sharing more tutorials with you. Thanks for tuning in. Have a nice day.